Hello everyone, today I'm doing a simple hardware review about a product that I've looked forward to owning for a long time, the Fanatec Podium Racing Wheel F1. Now this is pretty much a DD1, it just has the chip inside of it to make it compatible with the PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5. You might recall from my earlier video about the Simucube 2, I talked about how I kind of regretted buying the Simucube 2 because despite all the online feedback about it and how great of a wheelbase it was, I didn't like how expensive the wireless steering wheels were for Simucube, and I also didn't like losing some of the more casual advantages that Fanatec as a ecosystem offers. It turns out that regret sort of persisted even after I made the video, so I decided to make a shift back to Fanatec, sell my Simucube 2, and buy the wheelbase I originally wanted. Now, because I live in Japan, this wheelbase was significantly more expensive for me than it would be for you if you live in any of the regions where Fanatec sells it. I had to pay $150 to ship it from the US to Japan with insurance, and I also had to pay $120 in customs fee. Also, if I have any catastrophic issues with it, I will have to send it back to Fanatec in the US because Fanatec in Japan doesn't officially sell it or support it. This is sort of a wash compared to the Simucube 2 though, because even with the Simucube 2, I had to order it from Sim Racing Bay, and if I had any issues with it, Granite Devices informed me that I would have to pursue warranty support from the vendor of which I bought it, which means I would have to ship it out in that case as well. Now, since Fanatec does have a Japan storefront, I do get access to other benefits like being able to order steering wheels, pedals, or other accessories that are compatible with the Podium Racing Wheel F1, and I also get the ability to order some replacement parts that might be necessary should any issues arise, such as the power supply, USB cables, or maybe other components that are used in the wheelbase that don't require the PlayStation compatibility electronics. Now, without delaying anymore, let's get into the topic. So before I get into the actual details of the video, I'd like to do my patented too long didn't watch summary. So basically, I don't regret it at all. The Fanatec Podium Racing Wheel F1 is a very excellent wheelbase. It's a very good combo. The steering wheel that it comes with can be used for GT3 or Formula cars. I do think that the smoothness is not at the level that the Simucube 2 is, but it's definitely smooth enough. And unless you're very picky about smoothness and you've tried out some of the other like in-runner servo motor based solutions that are out there, I don't think that you're going to notice that it's not that smooth compared to the Simucube. I think that it's maybe anywhere from 80 to 95% as smooth, and you're definitely going to feel like it's a significant step up compared to the Club Sport or the CSL wheelbases. I do think that it's also much easier to use. The time that it took me to set up the wheelbase and get in and start driving was maybe less than 20 minutes. I feel like it was faster to set up than any of the other wheelbases that I've used. Even the Club Sport and CSL were a little more complicated to use because out of the box, the profiles that come with the Club Sport and CSL didn't feel that good to me, but the profiles that came on the Fanalab software were very good for the Podium Racing Wheel. I do think that in iRacing and Assetto Corsa, the smoothness difference between the Simucube 2 and the Fanatec solution is a little bit different. I think that iRacing has a little bit bigger of a smoothness difference between the two wheelbases, but in Assetto Corsa Competizione, maybe because there's a lot more road details and there's a lot more different types of effects in the force feedback, maybe the difference is harder to notice. But certainly with either of the sim racing titles, I had no issues driving with the Fanatec Podium Racing Wheel. I had no issues catching slides, making corrections, feeling the curbs, and any other details that were inside of the racing sims. Overall, I'm very happy with my purchase, and I think that I'm going to spend a lot more time driving compared to when I owned the Simucube 2. One minor disadvantage that I consider to be a problem with the Fanatec solution is that they don't include an emergency stop inside of the box. I think that with direct drive wheelbases, anything above 10 Newton meters of torque, and I think that the makers should include an emergency stop, even if it's a simple one with the simple torque cutoff red button. The reason why is because these direct drive wheelbases are very powerful, and when you wreck, they can spin very wildly and they could hurt your hands or even break your wrists. Now, Simucube 2 includes an emergency stop in every single version of the Simucube 2 wheelbase that they build. Even the Simucube 2 Sport comes with an emergency stop. So in my opinion, I think that this is a little bit greedy of Fanatec, and I kind of hope in the future that they change their stance on this and include an emergency stop in the box. Now, you could DIY build one. It was relatively simple for me to build one. It only took about 30 minutes once I got all the parts together. There's a couple of videos that I'm going to link in the description if you decide that you want to do that too. Now, in my opinion, I think that this is a fantastic wheelbase. You're definitely not going to regret it. And if you are in the same position as me and you want to drive on PlayStation or Xbox in the future, this is probably the only direct drive solution you could use. There are some USB adapters in the market, like the Drive Hub and the GameX adapter. I think that they're a little sort of obtuse and difficult to use, whereas with the Fanatec wheelbase, you just plug the USB into the console and that's it, which is a little more friendly in my opinion. So overall, I'm very happy with it, and I give it 2 thumbs up. So now let's talk about the contents of what's inside of the box. So I'm going to show some clips of me unboxing, and I'm going to show some clips of the accessories that are inside. But for the most part, this is one area that I feel Fanatec sort of stands apart from other companies, and that's when it comes to presentation. The box looks amazing, and when you first open it up, you're really sort of awestruck at how the product looks and how everything is presented to you. The wheel and wheelbase are mounted together visually the same as they appear on the box and the artwork. So it's kind of cool because you open the box and you see it exactly as it looks like on the outside. The steering wheel is mounted to the wheelbase by default, which, while it looks really cool, in my opinion, this is sort of not a good idea because the bottom of the formula wheel sits at a slightly lower height than the bottom of the wheelbase, which means that if you want to lay the wheelbase and the steering wheel flat on, say, your table or your floor, the bottom of the steering wheel is going to lift the bottom of the wheelbase slightly at the front, and it's also going to apply a little bit of vertical pressure on the drive shaft, which could cause it to warp or have issues over time. It's not a big deal though, and I'm sure it's not going to cause any issues if you only lay it down for a few minutes. But personally, if you want to lay it down on a flat surface before you install it, I would just remove the steering wheel. And personally, I think that they could still achieve the same level of aesthetics even if they don't have the steering wheel mounted out of the box. Inside of the box, aside from that though, you get the traditional Fanatec goodies inside. You get a quick release locking bolt, you get some default black colored decals for the formula wheel, you get an RJ12 cable to replace the cable that is included with your Club Sport or CSL pedals, you get a braided ferrite core USB cable, you get a massive power brick that makes a gaming laptop power adapter look like a Nintendo Switch power adapter. You get the typical Fanatec sticker swag, you get a torque key, and of course the ever necessary silicone packets. I love my silicone packets. Now, another important thing to keep in mind is that the Fanatec Podium Racing Wheel F1 is sold as a complete single unit. It is not a bundle and it is not a set. The difference between this and the DD1 formula set is that the DD1 formula set comes in 3 separate boxes, with the Formula V2 wheel in its own box and the advanced paddle module in its own box as well. I'll get into that later when I compare the Formula steering wheels, but that's just something to keep in mind. Looking at the actual wheelbase and the steering wheel, and again, I'll talk about the steering wheel in a little more detail later on in the video, but for the wheelbase, there's a few key points that I think are important. The first is that I noticed that it's built a lot better than I imagined it would be. When I saw it in the videos, I felt like from the tone of the reviewers, it wouldn't be as sturdy or as well built as other direct drive wheelbases that are out there, but when I got it out of the box and in my hands, I felt like, wow, this is a pretty sturdy unit. It feels really good in your hands. It's all metal construction. It has very clean lines, but it doesn't feel cheap or plastic in any way. It definitely looks better in person than it does in pictures or in videos. The clean metal design, in my opinion, is a lot less noisy than the CSL and the Club Sport wheelbases. So just take it from me, the build quality is pretty nice, and you might be surprised at how good it looks. Regarding installation and setup, I mounted the wheelbase to my Track Racer wheel mount, which can also be used on DIY aluminum profile cockpits. I used the 3-hole M6 pattern on the bottom of the wheelbase, which is the same pattern as the Club Sport and CSL wheelbases. Please note that if you don't have any M6 bolts available, you'll need to buy them, as Fanatec doesn't include any inside the box. So make sure you pick up some that are maybe about 1 centimeter long or up to 1.5 centimeters long, if depending on the thickness of your wheel mount. Once I connected the cables, the torque key, and I downloaded the latest drivers from the Fanatec forum, the wheelbase was detected pretty quickly. I was given a prompt in the Fanatec property page in order to install the latest firmware for both the wheelbase and the steering wheel, and in less than 15 minutes from the time that I started to mount it on my cockpit, I was ready to drive. I was pretty surprised at how good the default profiles feel for Automobilista 2 and Assetto Corsa Competizione. iRacing, on the other hand, might require a little bit more tweaking because the iRacing force feedback signals is one of the lowest quality signals to process due to its low frequency rate. Fanalab's software is also very easy to use, and I liked that it showed me profiles related to the sim racing titles that I already had installed. You also have the ability to customize the LED lights on your steering wheel and change how they behave, and you can also change the way the vibration effects work based on the specific sim racing titles that you have on your system. Changing steering wheels is also pretty straightforward as long as you follow the instructions the way that Fanatec tells you to. Loosen the locking nut behind your steering wheel, hold the quick release open, and wiggle the wheel a little bit at a time to get it loose. Once you have the steering wheel off, before installing the next steering wheel, you want to tighten the locking nut, not until it's all the way tightened, but just until the rubber O-ring is flush between the locking nut and the quick release mounting shaft, and then install the new steering wheel and tighten the locking nut afterwards. The rubber O-ring will expand in the horizontal direction, creating a pressure fit which will hold the steering wheel in place. Overall, the quick release feels very rigid, and while it's not as rigid as the Simucube quick release, it comes ready to use on every Fanatec Club Sport or Podium steering wheel. So the fact that it's good enough is enhanced by the fact that you don't need to buy a quick release wheel side kit for every steering wheel that you buy. Operating the tuning menu is also enhanced compared to the CSL and Club Sport wheelbases, because now the ITM screen shows you information related to each setting that you are adjusting as you are adjusting it, which means that you can change your tuning settings, and if you don't understand what setting you're looking at, you don't need to alt-tab out of your full screen game in order to check the profiles or documentation online. You can actually look at the screen on the wheelbase and see in detail what the setting does that you are adjusting it, which is especially useful if you are in the middle of a race and you are changing the settings while in the pit stop or while driving down a straight. How does it drive? That's the important question, right? Well, it drives really well, but let's talk about the details about why it drives really well. So for the first sim, let's talk about iRacing, because this is where I spend the majority of my time driving, because there's no driving clubs available in my region that I have a good time talking to or organizing races with. So iRacing is where I spend a majority of my time. So in iRacing, I drove in a few laps with the GT3 and the Porsche Cup, and while I don't have any footage of it, I also tried it out in the Skip Barber and the GTE Ferrari 488. The one area where I think that the DD1 is noticeably not as smooth as the Simucube 2 is at low torque application. So while entering and exiting the pit stops, the torque ripple is much more prevalent, as at this low force, the spinning magnets are trying to find their maximum area over the stators along the center of the drive shaft. Now, at low speeds, the torque is unfortunately not strong enough to overpower the strength of the permanent magnets, so you can feel them being pulled by the stationary stator whenever the steering location is not flush. So basically, the magnets and the stator have a maximum surface area that they can be over, and when it's in between that, if the force isn't strong enough, then you can physically feel the permanent magnets snapping into place over the permanent stator. Now, as you can imagine, as the forces get higher, as you start driving faster, or as a race becomes a little more like realistic driving, the forces are going to be so high that at that point the torque is strong enough to overpower the magnetic strength, and it becomes harder to notice this physical sensation. I would say that from around 0 to 2 Newton meters of torque, the difference between the Simucube and Fanatec direct drives is at its largest, maybe 20%. But once you get above and higher than 10 Newton meters of torque, the difference becomes a lot more subtle, something like maybe 5% at most. And again, that's not really an exact percentage, it's just how different it feels in my hands. Without comparing it to the Simucube 2 though, the Podium is it's a really smooth direct drive wheel. You get a lot of details, and it's definitely a marked improvement over the CSL and Club Sport wheelbase. It especially becomes obvious when you start driving over curbs or bumps or slips, or if you start to lose traction. Any sort of area where you have a lot of road details and effects, like maybe the sausage on Laguna Seca, you're going to notice that this is a marked improvement over other wheelbases that you've used. It's not going to make you faster when you're driving well. So under ideal circumstances, the wheelbase is not going to change anything about your lap times. But where you are going to notice a difference is when you make mistakes. It's going to become a lot easier to catch slides and to recover, so that mistakes aren't going to be as fatal as they are if you were on a slower wheelbase. You get all the advantages of a direct drive with the Podium Racing Wheel. Make no mistake about that. The details are going to come very fast. They're going to come very suddenly, and you're not going to feel like there's a delay or any sort of issues with the force feedback not being on time or being as reactive or as quick as you might expect it to. So try not to get caught up in all the details about speed or slew rate or any other details that other direct drive wheels offer. Especially not in this regard, because for me, my lap times are pretty consistent in iRacing between the Simucube 2 and the Podium. When it comes to Assetto Corsa Competizione, I have to say that the differences became a lot more subtle, actually, and it became even harder for me to notice the difference between the Podium Racing Wheel and the Simucube 2. This might be because Assetto Corsa Competizione has a lot more road effects and details. There's a lot more stuff going on with the force feedback in Assetto Corsa Competizione, and this might make it so that you're not going to notice like the very fine details of smoothness when you're driving on straights. And I think this is partly because Assetto Corsa Competizione is a much more modern racing sim with probably more advanced physics and force feedback compared to iRacing. It's still smoother on the Granite Devices wheelbases, but the difference is just going to be a lot more subtle and maybe harder to notice. This sim, in my opinion, has a lot of really good force feedback and physics, and the more complicated the force feedback gets, the better the Podium feels, especially compared to belt-driven wheelbases like the Club Sport and the CSL Elite. I personally feel that curbing details like the rumble strips and curbs in Assetto Corsa Competizione feel better than any other sim that I've ever driven, and I'm happy to report that it feels very good with the Podium wheel. So yeah, in both of these sims it drives really, really great, and I had a lot of fun driving it. For the next part of the video, I'm going to talk about the PlayStation edition of the Formula steering wheel compared to the Formula V2, and in particular what is different about this steering wheel that only comes with the Fanatec Podium Racing Wheel F1. I think I said the name correctly that time. So if some of you have looked closely at this steering wheel, you might wonder, is this a Formula V2? And as far as Windows 10 and the Fanatec wheel property page is concerned, this is a Formula V2 with an advanced paddle module. It behaves exactly the same, it has the exact same functions, the same encoders, and it basically looks and feels exactly the same. The differences between this and the Formula V2 are purely aesthetic. Now, similar to the special edition Formula wheels that Fanatec releases every year, this has an open bottom and the Formula V2 wheel has a closed bottom. The other difference between them is that the PlayStation version comes with blue and yellow accents, and while some people are not a fan of it, I think maybe because I'm a Golden State Warriors fan and my alma mater was University of California, San Diego, I have sort of like a weakness for blue and yellow themed products, so I actually like the way that it looks. But I think even if you don't particularly like blue, you'll still be impressed at the way that it looks. It's a very nice wheel and it looks very nice. It also has this F1 logo at the front of the steering wheel itself, which is not present on the Formula V2 that's compatible with Xbox. And speaking of compatibility with Xbox, that's the one major difference between the Formula V2 and the PlayStation version of the Formula wheel that comes with the Podium Racing Wheel. And actually, that's a difference between the Formula V2 and any other Formula steering wheel. The special edition Formula wheels, the Club Sport, eSports and Carbon Formula wheels, and this PlayStation Formula wheel are all only compatible with PlayStation and PC. The Formula V2 is the only Formula steering wheel that's compatible with Xbox, and that's because Xbox compatibility, if you might recall from Will Ford and Boosted Media when he talks about this, Xbox compatibility is accomplished through a chip inside of the steering wheel, and PlayStation compatibility is accomplished from the inside of the wheelbase. So the only way to get both PlayStation and Xbox compatibility is to buy an Xbox compatible steering wheel and use it on a PlayStation compatible wheelbase, which is the main reason why I personally purchased the Formula V2 steering wheel. Now, in terms of the other aesthetic differences, yeah, the carbon fiber has blue accents on it, and yeah, the F1 logo is not there, but there is also a difference in terms of the accessories that are included. The truth is that the Formula PlayStation Edition wheel that comes with the Podium Racing Wheel F1 is not a complete Formula and Advanced Paddle Module set. When you buy the DD1 Formula bundle that comes with the Formula V2 and the Advanced Paddle Module, you get 3 separate boxes. And this is an important detail because inside of the Podium Racing Wheel F1 box, I did not find any of the additional hardware that comes with the Advanced Paddle Module. This means the GT paddles and the hardware in order to add spacers to the paddles for the Advanced Paddle Module were not included. So if you want to use GT paddles on the Formula wheel, you unfortunately cannot do that with the Formula wheel that comes with the Podium Racing Wheel F1. So when you buy the DD1 with the Formula V2 and Advanced Paddle Module bundle, you get 3 separate boxes. So I think this is an important detail because it's something that you might not be aware of. I was under the impression that the Podium Racing Wheel F1 would probably have the rest of the Advanced Paddle Module hardware inside of the box, but it did not. The other difference is that the LED screen on the PlayStation version of the Formula wheel is blue, and the LED on the Formula V2 is white. Now, in my opinion, I think it's worth considering buying the Formula V2 and then selling the PlayStation version of the Formula wheel. And the reason why is because some people want this color pattern and don't really care about Xbox compatibility, and because they can't buy this wheel separately, the only way for them to get a hold of it is if somebody who buys the Podium Racing Wheel F1 decides to sell it. So in my opinion, because of the fact that you can't buy this separately, even with the yearly releases, you might be able to recuperate the MSRP of the Formula V2 with the Advanced Paddle Module just by selling this wheel by itself, even though it doesn't have a box or the Club Sport drawstring bag. Now, your mileage will vary based on that. I'm not sure what these have sold for in the past. You might be able to cross-reference eBay, but it's something worth considering. The main reason why I did it is because I do plan on buying an Xbox Series S or Series X, especially when Forza Motorsport comes out, and in order to use my Podium Racing wheel with it, I would need to use the Formula V2 steering wheel. So this is just something to keep in mind. Overall though, I really like the way the Formula steering wheel feels. If you've never used any of the Fanatec Formula wheels, you should look at my McLaren GT3 review because I talk about the fact that the steering wheel, even though it's only 27 centimeters in diameter, I feel that it is big enough for GT3 and I had no issues using it for those cars. So yeah, it looks really cool. I like it. So yeah, my final thoughts. Overall, I'm pretty happy with it. And I've stopped window shopping, which my wife is happy about. I have no intention of selling this wheelbase. I hope it doesn't give me any problems in the future, but so far I've driven it pretty extensively for a lot of hours in the time that I've owned it for the last few weeks, and I haven't experienced any issues yet. One area that I would like to see Fanatec make some improvements on, well, there's a couple of things that I think would be nice. The first thing that I think would be nice is if they were to offer the PlayStation compatible Podium Racing Wheel as a separate set without a steering wheel, because some people might not need the Formula steering wheel, and I think it'd be nice if they sold the Podium wheelbase by itself, maybe for $150 more than the DD1. The other area that I would like to see them improve on is maybe making an emergency kill switch that doesn't have the power on and power off button, and including that with every direct drive wheelbase that they sell. I think that it's a little too greedy for Fanatec to not include an emergency stop in the box, but yeah, those are the only real 2 disadvantages that I see. Overall, I'm very impressed with the wheelbase. The force feedback feels really good. I really have a good time driving it, and honestly, I just felt really good to get it out of the box and to finally own it. It took a lot of trouble for me to get it here in Japan because I had to order it from the United States, which was pretty expensive, like over $2,000. But overall, like I was pretty happy to finally have it in my hands. I don't feel any regrets like what I felt with the Simucube 2. The other thing is that it does have a 3-year warranty. The manufacturer's warranty on the Simucube 2 is only 2 years, but if you do order it from overseas like I did, you're unfortunately going to have to send it to the US to get any service yeah, if there's any issues that come up in the future, that's where you'll have to send it. Overall, though, I think that a lot of the sort of extreme views about Simucube 2 being better than Fanatec is a little bit unfounded. In my opinion, the smoothness is definitely really solid. The speed of the wheelbase is very solid, and I had a really good time driving it. So, yeah, it's a very nice wheelbase. And if you want to stay inside the Fanatec ecosystem, you're not going to regret buying this wheelbase at all. So try not to let any of the really strong opinionated views on the internet get to your head. At the end of the day, this direct drive wheelbase, and really any of the direct drive wheelbases that are available, would probably enhance your driving experience a lot. In terms of like whether or not you should upgrade your pedals versus buying a direct drive wheelbase, what I'm going to say is that fast lap times aren't the only thing that you should consider when you're upgrading your hardware. For me personally, I sim race not to get like the fastest lap times ever. Like, I'm not trying to min-max my driving scores online. I'm trying to actually enjoy driving inside of my house that I live in with my wife, because driving sports cars and going to the track is very expensive, and it's also difficult to do when you have a family at home. So by like increasing the immersion as much as possible, I can enjoy driving at home without having to buy a sports car or go to the track. So yeah, overall, I'm very happy with it. It's very nice. I really like it. If you have any other questions about it, please let me know down at the bottom. Somebody had requested to ask me, like, do I actually drive more now that I've switched? And I have to say, yeah, I definitely find myself wanting to get into the seat and drive more now that I have the Podium Racing Wheel F1. I don't know why that is. Like, the Simucube 2 wasn't like a pain to set up, but I just think when I owned the Simucube 2, I just kept, in my mind, I kept mentally going back to wanting the Podium Racing Wheel F1. I kept going to the Fanatec website and looking at it and going like, oh man, I should have bought that. Like, I really wanted it. Then, like, now that I have it, I don't feel that anymore. So I think ultimately just go with what your gut tells you. If your gut tells you, I really want a Sim Magic, buy Sim Magic. Sim Magic's, it's really nice. I actually want to try it out because I really like the steering wheels that they have. But, like, whatever your gut feeling is, whatever your first instinct is that you want to buy, I think you should go get that. Because if you go and you ask other people, you're just going to get doubts all the time. I think the perfect analogy to think about it is like the Lancer Evolution versus the Subaru WRX STI. Like, the Evolution was absolutely a faster car. It was faster at the track. It was faster at the straights. They even said that it had a better steering rack and all this other stuff. Like, it was, for all intents and purposes, it was a faster sports car than the STI. But for some reason, some reviewers, they said that they found themselves just wanting to go back to the STI for some reason. Like, they said that something about driving it and using it, just, it was calling to them more, and it was the one that they wanted to take home, which is kind of interesting, right? Because if you're buying a sports car strictly to get something that's going to be fast and you're going to use it at the track, like, you would think that you would go with the one that's faster, but for some reason they liked the STI more. And I think that's kind of how I feel about the Fanatec direct drive wheelbases. I think I lean more on the casual side. Like, people who like Fanatec hardware, they tend to just not really get into these sort of really detailed discussions about force feedback and settings and stuff like that. They just want to plug it in and drive, and I think that's kind of where I sit. Yeah, but yeah, overall, I was pretty happy with it. I feel pretty good about it. Really quickly, I want to say that I send out my condolences to William Marsh and his family and his friends and any of his viewers, and especially out to Will Ford. I know that you're going through a difficult time right now. Sim Racing Paddock is one of my favorite channels, and I actually bought my Podium Racing Wheel F1 because of the video that William Marsh made about it. So, like, yeah, the loss of William Marsh is really big. Like, I don't think my channel will ever be as good as Sim Racing Paddock, but like, I just think it's a big tragedy, like what happened. So if any of you are going through any trouble, or you're having issues, or you're feeling like you're upset, or you don't know why, and you're thinking about doing something really drastic, please shoot me a message, drop me a comment, send me an email. Just reach out, because there's people out there who will help you and are willing to listen to you and hear you out, and I'm willing to hear you out and listen to you if you have any issues. I think a bunch of other sim racers in the community, like Dan Suzuki and Will Ford, they run a Discord channel, so feel free to join it if you're looking for any sort of support or help or anything like that. Yeah, like, I think that we need to do what we can to reduce the stigma around mental illness, because it's very real. Mental illness can affect you in the same ways that physical illness can, and in some ways worse. So yeah, it's very unfortunate what William Marsh was going through, and I wish that I had known him personally. I could have tried to be there for him like the way that Will Ford did. But yeah, rest in peace, buddy. Your channel was really great, and thank you for the video about the Fanatec Podium Racing Wheel F1. It's thanks to you that I bought this wheelbase, and I agree with everything that you said about it. I really enjoy it. It's really nice. Thank you for watching, guys. And lastly, to my nieces and nephews back home, I love you and I miss you all. Jordan, David, Ariana, Gemma, Alessandra, I love you all. Me and your aunt, we're going to come visit you guys later this year. Yeah, so I love you guys. Thank you for watching my channel. I'll see you guys soon.